Robert. Well, some Christians are taught the Bible is inerrant. All of it is literally, factually true. I'm not sure what those who believe that would do with the fact that Luke is mistaken in our lesson today. There is literally no region between Samaria and Galilee. A precision on geography may seem like a small matter. What about doubts we might have that Jesus literally cured 10 lepers of physical ailments by just uttering words? And I know this can be troubling to hear, but I have that particular doubt. I don't believe Jesus, as a fully human being, literally had supernatural, inhuman powers that allowed him to instantly cure physical ailments with words or touch and magically. And I say that rather bluntly because I want to make it clear that in progressive Christian churches like this one, you could be a good person, you could be a spirit-filled person, you could be a Christian, you could even be a pastor and not believe the Bible is inerrant or literal. It's okay to rely on reason, have doubts, and be religious all at the same time. Despite what others may claim, there's no sin in that. From a modern standpoint, those of us who doubt the Bible is inerrant or that it was intended to be literal are on solid ground. The Bible itself has nary a verse that claims the Bible is inerrant, that it's meant to be literal, or that it was all sort of dictated by God. And even if a verse claimed all that, we would not have to believe it. Plus, we don't even have originals of the Gospels, only fragments of hand copies of hand copies of hand copies of oral statements of recollections of stories. And all the Gospel words are translated from ancient times and ancient languages. All of which in modern science and even courts of law would be highly unreliable evidence as hearsay upon hearsay upon hearsay. On a witness stand, anyone relying on Luke's gospel as literal fact would be easily discredited. The Gospels are fraught with problems when the application of modern reasoning is used to explore them as inerrant historical facts or as science. Many Americans are raised to employ critical reasoning in their thinking, and a lot of us don't accept things without viable proof. And I suspect one reason attendance at churches across the nation has dropped off is because of a perception that Christianity and all its churches demand a belief that the Bible is inerrant and literal. And it's okay to have those beliefs, but they are not required. Many of us find inerrancy and literalism unacceptable. And unfortunately, many think all Christians support the inerrant and literal view of the Bible when many of us do not. And here's the thing, the Bible was not written to be used like a history book or a science book, nor was it written error-free, and it doesn't even claim to be. And Christians need not believe it is all literally true. We don't have to see the Bible as inerrant or as about literal facts. We can choose to, but we don't have to. Such teachings are not biblical. They're not from Jesus. They're not from Paul. They're actually relatively new. They arose in response to the age of reason's use of empirical evidence and reason to prove things. And worried about challenges to faith, fundamentalists started claiming the Bible was written by God in order to make its words override any other proof, any factual evidence that they didn't like. It's a relatively new, modern, man-made doctrine. Not all churches, clergy, and Christians accept that doctrine. Many reject it. And I'm not saying anything new or radical, at least not in traditional churches. Mainline biblical scholars have long asserted and taught seminarians that books of the Bible, and in particular the Gospels, were not intended by their authors to be strictly historical accounts of what literally happened back then. The Gospels were intended to reflect the community's experiences of God. They were not aimed at historical truth, but rather theological truths. And this means that while the Bible may not set out inerrant factual accounts or events, it nonetheless contains truth. And some may scratch their heads and ask, can a document with untrue facts speak truth? And the answer is yes. First of all, no one is claiming the Bible is void of historic information. The claim is that the Bible was not meant to be taken as a word-for-word historical account of historic events, or that the authors got it all down right. Scholars can and do comb through the Bible and find echoes of history. For example, the text in today's story is full of useful information, even though it's so short. Information that we can reason out. Like Luke's unfamiliarity with the geography of Palestine indicates he probably was not from Palestine. And the writing style itself suggests the author was educated and aware of the make me clean leper story in Mark chapter 1, and also the Old Testament story about Naaman, the foreign leper that Elisha heals. And we can also find in the text the ancient Near East custom of restricting lepers to the outskirts of town and requiring them to call out to others a warning that they were there. And it's also true that they were required to go to priests for an official okay to return to the community. And we can also see that Jesus was known to travel back and forth from Galilee and Jerusalem, which abutted one another. And this is very interesting. One of the things I love about the story, we learn Jesus was known and remembered as a healer. I note, though, that our modern ears generally hear biblical healing stories as asking us to believe Jesus performed supernatural events, miracles which are otherwise unbelievable, and nothing we could attain. And this seems to give us three basic choices with the healing stories. We believe what's unbelievable, we disbelieve what's unbelievable, or believe the stories can contain metaphoric, that is, symbolic truth. And no one here has to choose as I do, but I choose the metaphoric symbolic meaning option. And I believe, based on reasons I'll explain, that metaphoric meanings were likely intended by the Gospel's authors. And one could do a lot with our lesson that Susie read so nicely, just as it stands, to find symbolic truth. But it helps a whole bunch to understand that the term healing has a different meaning in Luke and in Jesus' context. Today we tend to hear healing as a complete cure of bodily or mental ailment. I think I've mentioned before that John Dominic Crossan, a renowned Jesus scholar, has asserted that we need to understand there are two aspects of sickness, disease and illness. And there's a difference between curing a disease and healing an illness. Disease is caused by an abnormality in a biological function which is best cured by a medical practitioner. Healing, on the other hand, applies to experiences of being perceived as ill. Something's wrong with you. How other persons perceive and see a person as ill is best remedied by a spirit person, a holy man or a holy woman. Applying this to Jesus' healing the lepers story might go like this. Lepers had a skin disease or a problem. It could be a serious ailment or even something as common as acne and psoriasis back then. And such ailments in Jesus, they made them unclean and outcast from society. They were stigmatized. The extreme undesirability of their unclean presence was their illness. That uncleanliness was a label derived from a social construct not liking skin issues and not wanting people with skin issues around. They were icky. And so what Jesus did was remove the labels. He deconstructed the uncleanliness so it no longer existed. It was gone. Jesus altered the perception by declaring the unclean clean and treating them as such. And we can see this earlier in Luke in chapter 5, where a leper literally says to Jesus, "If you choose, you can make me clean." And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I do choose, be made clean." Jesus heals the leper's illness of being seen as an untouchable, unclean outcast. He does this by touching him, by declaring him clean and making him an acceptable member of his community. Stigma gone. And as a consequence, the leper is no longer untouchable, outcast, or unclean. He is healed of his outcast status. His illness, though not cured, of whatever underlying physical disease might exist. Crossan calls parables a made-up story with a powerful theological punch. And he thinks that the gospel writers, like Luke, were not afraid to create parables out of Jesus' life to make their own theological point in their writings. And this comports with others who think the writer of Luke expanded on Mark's story and on Jesus' reputation as a healer to create this lesson. What could be the theological point of 10 lepers being healed and only one, a hated and despised Samaritan, the lowest of the low, responding by thanking God and falling before Jesus in gratitude? Another Jesus scholar, Marcus Borg, writes that metaphors are about seeing, not believing. Metaphor is poetry plus, not factuality minus. Metaphor is not less than fact, but more. If we see today's story as metaphor, we can see more than just facts, more than Jesus making 10 lepers well and only one saying thanks. We can see Jesus being remembered as a spirit person, a holy man, who on one level transformed lives by in essence saying, you're not an outcast in my community. I hereby heal you, the social declaration that you are ill, by denying its validity. I do not perceive you as ill. You are healed. And when we see the story that way, the good news is that like Jesus, we are capable of the same type of healing power. Drug addict, you are not an outcast in our community. Be healed. Bipolar sufferer, you are not an outcast in our community. Be healed. Alcoholic, you are not an outcast in our community. Be healed. Anyone with a disability, you are not an outcast in our community. Be healed. And we know Jesus did not just limit this healing power to those seen as ill. He healed all outcasts. And there's a memory of this in today's story. We can hear Jesus communicate, Samaritan, you are not an outcast in my community. Be healed. We can hear similar memories elsewhere in other Jesus stories. Tax collector, you're not an outcast in my community. Be healed. Prostitute, you're not an outcast in my community. Be healed. Women and children, you are not outcasts in my community. Be healed. All of that is good news. And that good news includes that we can do this type of healing. Non-white people, you are not outcasts. Be healed. Sick and poor, you are not outcasts. Be healed. People of other faiths, you are not outcasts. Be healed. Women, you are not outcasts. Be healed. Other able, you are not outcasts. Be healed. Strangers, you are not outcasts. Be healed. Refugees, you are not outcasts. Be healed. LGBTQ plus, you are not outcasts. Be healed. And seeing the story in this light, Jesus' supernatural power is transformed to a power we can all wield for good, for God, as holy men and holy women. And that insight alone is amazing, but there's more. Jesus tells the 10 to comply with the purity law and go to the priests. And the 9 who left did nothing wrong by piously following the law, but they missed out on doing the one thing that could transform not just their outcast status, their very being. Beyond following rules and regulations is the power of personal response to God's grace. That grace is free. It's given with no strings attached. Anyone, even the lowest of the low, even a lawyer, even a non-Christian, even a foreign Samaritan leper, even any of us can be saved from our lesser self by personally responding to God's gift of grace. And not because we have to. We don't. But because turning to God makes us better, makes us well. As metaphor, this story proclaims the ultimate good news in every sense of the word. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how low in life you or others may see you, if you turn toward God, just turn toward God, you'll be exalted and you will be better. You will, in fact, be well.